Hi everyone, this is Jamie and welcome to another episode of the Yogi Within podcast. Okay, on today's episode, I'm going to be talking about what's the best way to phrase this. I'm going to do a few areas around this, we could say sexual energy. We could say concepts of celibacy or restraint or sexual restraint, we could say. And I would say I'm going to go over some more of the traditional meanings of the words like Brahmacharya, or ways that a spiritual practitioner might go about controlling, or ways that it's traditionally viewed to potentially restrict yourself in a sexual way. I'm going to talk about this from different perspectives, but mostly from my own perspective of how I've explored this within yogic traditions and my own practices, but also specifically around how I've explored this within Buddhism, and specifically within Tibetan Buddhism, or you could say the Vajrayana path of Buddhism, more tantric practices, which have been much more in line with myself. And I'll explain how I view sexual energy and how this can be used in a positive way in our life that is not so physical. Now, one of the reasons I did this, or I'm doing this episode today, it's kind of a follow-up from the previous episode where I was discussing the subtle body. So we talked about these energy channels and how we might view those energy channels within the body. And this also relates to my own philosophy, specifically around bandhas. So if you haven't listened to those, go and check out my episode on bandha and the subtle body. Now, thinking back actually, when I first started doing this podcast, I would say there was a focus specifically around this area, around sexual energy and around how that feels within the body. And I initially started this podcast, I would say I was very much in that headspace around tantric practices when I started this podcast. And obviously, you know, as your life changes and your focuses changes, as they usually do, this shifts and changes, and my podcast probably highlights that as my life changes. Different stresses come and go, different focuses shift. And I would say definitely lately, I've become much more drawn back to these tantric practices, especially with a focus around sexual energy, which is why I'm going to share this today. And really, you could say an evolution of my own thoughts around this and how my own practices have changed. I've got lots of notes on this today because there's lots we could say about this, and I think that different traditions view this and talk about this in different ways, but I'll give my own thoughts on this. Now, in yoga, or you could say in a lot of shamanic movements, specifically around in Hinduism, we have this term Brahmacharya. Now, I would say the way this is largely taught and the way this is largely explained within yoga, and a lot of Westerners will view this in this way, is in some way it's restricting ourselves in some way. So in Brahmacharya, we're talking about potentially a monastic way of living, or a renunciate way of living, where we are restricting ourselves in some way with our desires and our needs, and more so in a sexual way. Now, the way I was understood and was taught the concepts of Brahmacharya from a Hindu perspective was mostly around just right conduct. If you're on the spiritual path and you're interested in spirituality, it was largely around having right frame of mind, right thoughts, and the way we use our energy. And you could think about that in a very broad way. But I think largely the way it's taught is in a sense of restricting ourselves in some way sexually, or maybe we have control over the way we use our sexual desires. And again, if you're pursuing a monastic life, then you will renounce these practices, physical practices of sex, and even mental visionary practices around the way we might envisage things in our imagination around sexual practices. Now, some people view this in a liberating way, because if you're on the spiritual path, potentially, depends how deep you want to go into this, but you're renouncing the sense of desires, and the practice of renouncing these desires, leads you more close to potential spiritual liberation and freeing yourself from suffering, in Buddhist terms, from desires, thoughts and wants. Now, this is the more monastic approach to this, which wouldn't be available really for the layperson, so the people that aren't taking monastic vows, and most of us aren't. So this podcast today is mostly around how we might approach this from a non-monastic perspective, but also my own thoughts on this. I was never really drawn to the monastic side of Buddhism specifically, or yogic practices, because it didn't really feel in line with the way I view myself as a human being. I'm going to sidetrack a little bit in and out of these subjects, but it should be able to tie up close to the end. I view myself and human beings in an animalistic way, and I think that for me, large parts of Buddhism and Shamanic movement, different kind of Eastern practices, even in the West, in Catholicism and that, had more of a negative connotation, a negative view of the intrinsic desires within the body, and it was always seen that these are things that we're looking to get rid of in some way, or control, or suppress. And the more animalistic, primal desires of the human body, we were looking to kind of control or subdue in some way. And I think from the English language and the English language perspective of looking at this always felt to me suppressive, And I've spent maybe, let's just jump into that. Actually, I've spent maybe a year or two in total in India, and I would say culturally, traveling and being in different countries, the vibe I got from spending large amounts of time in Indian culture and experiencing in the culture largely felt to me quite sexually repressed. This was my sense and my feeling when I've spent time in India, and what I witnessed and observations around cultural differences. For me, human beings are generally way too controlled as they are, and I think that humans, especially in the West, definitely suffer from lots of shame and guilt around sexual desire and their wants and needs, and I don't think we really need more of that. And it depends where you've studied this and what kind of teacher you might have had who explains these practices and what they might mean, but largely what I've experienced is a sense of guilt and shame and restraint and control around sexual desires. Now, this isn't to say that all forms of Hinduism or Buddhism discuss this in this way. It's just been my personal experience from study and meeting different teachers. But what I was largely drawn to was more of the tantric practices within yoga, and specifically in Tibetan Buddhism and Vajrayana, because it felt more in line with myself, but also it made more sense and it felt more natural. As a human being, as Jamie, I never really want to suppress my feelings and emotions. I don't really want to have a negative view on controlling those things, and I wouldn't want to feel like I am negating or in some way pushing to the side my natural desires. To me, this is not bandha. This isn't being in line with yourself, and this isn't really being true to your inherent nature. So for me, words like control, suppress, avoid, restrain, these words to me can be quite powerful. And, if you've studied Buddhism at any kind of level, you'll understand that words have a lot of power. And I think that when we use language in that way, when we think of restraining ourselves and controlling ourselves, for me this goes against my very nature as an animal on this planet, as a human being, and what intrinsically comes up with me, with my innate desires. So for me, I've tried to practice more of the tantric side of things, and the more this side of Buddhism and yoga that feels more in line with what it is to be a human being. It's not to say it's wrong, it's just my own take on this. And I'm going to talk about the ways we can view using this energy in a different way, where we don't feel like we're controlling or restraining. Because like I said, I think there's far too much sexual repression in society as a whole, especially around people's wants and desires, where this can actually lead to a negative feeling in the body and the mind, where we're not really being honest with ourselves and connecting with that innate energy that's within us and channeling it in a positive way. And that's mostly what I'm going to talk about today, is how we can channel that energy into a positive way, where we're not restricting and controlling ourselves. And there's definitely no shame or guilt in the thoughts that come up. Now, let's talk about our innate desires, right? The body, in a way, it's not separate from the mind, but there's things that happen in the body that we cannot ignore, yeah? So let's just go over those. If you're hungry, you can go without food for some time, yeah? For a period of time, for quite a while actually, you could go without food. But at some point, that energy is going to build and build and build to the point where it will be the only thing that you're thinking about. You'll sleep. When you go to sleep, you'll dream about it. When you close your eyes, your imagination will be drawn to food. It will be something you cannot ignore. This is the same with water. This is the same with sleep. This is also the same with sex. Yeah, this is an innate bodily desire to be in union with someone. Yeah, to connect with another human being, and come together to share energy in that way. Yeah, these are drivers that are innately embedded within us. A lot of monastic practices, or yogic practices, you could say, renunciate practices, were about controlling these desires, yeah? Because if you can control these desires and you have a stable mind and you're not being driven by your desires, there is an element of that can lead you further down the spiritual path in terms of understanding yourself at a deeper level, but also taking the mind into deeper waters. Yeah, when you go without sleep, or you go without water and food, or potentially sex, things build up in the body. And I think it's a very interesting thing to observe what happens in the body and the mind when you observe these things building up. And a lot of spiritual practices are about not reacting to what is initially something that is a very strong feeling. So potentially hunger, pain, something within you that gets triggered where you want something. And being able to wait and pause and take your time, where you choose when and how that happens, has a lot of power. This is definitely a mind control thing. Some practitioners have taken this into very deep waters. I mean, even Buddha's own story as a renunciate, is quite extreme, you could say, in some ways, where some renunciates, really go into very deep waters in terms of controlling and restricting themselves in terms of food, water, sex and sleep and things like this. This is a different path, I think, for most of us. I've experimented with some of this. I'll share some of my thoughts on that today, but most of us are not going to live those lives. And one of the reasons I didn't go down that road is because my main goal in these practices is about finding balance. Yeah, it's interesting to see how far we can go with things and potentially, restricting ourselves and controlling things in different ways. But I'm mostly interested in finding balance with food, water, sleep, and sexual energy, yeah? When you restrict something and you control something, for most people, this builds up and then a polar energy builds up and then it usually comes out in a stronger way. My observation with myself and most humans is that suppression of our innate desires, thoughts, speech, mostly leads to something negative, yeah? Because it builds up. One of the things that I've seen in students and myself over the years as one of the biggest blockages is suppressing our feelings, yeah? This comes out in a myriad of different ways and mostly negative when we're not expressing ourselves. I'm not saying that you need to react to everything and, shout from the rooftops whenever you feel something. This would be the wrong action. You could say that from Brahmacharya, this wouldn't be correct. Yeah, we need to be mindful of our conduct, but not to suppress our innate desires and our feelings, and definitely not having guilt or shame associated us. As a human being, I've found much more benefit and liberation from expressing myself in a mindful way, yeah, where we don't create any negative karma, we don't create a negative reaction from expressing ourselves. It's more of a love energy and a need to express ourselves fully so that energy is freed up, yeah? And to me, a lot of this is about that, yeah? It's freeing up energy, it's freeing up blockages in our body so that things move. Things don't move very well when they're controlled or restricted. They move very well when they're flowing, yeah, when they're moving. And this goes back to my previous episode on the subtle body. Now, we all have this sexual energy, yeah? We all have this creative energy, I would also call it, innately within us. Everybody experiences this desire and everyone experiences this within us. We can experience this in different ways. On one level, obviously there is the physical, yeah? At some point in our bodily need, there is a need to express that sexual energy in a physical way. And this is something that is just embedded within us. This is definitely not something we should feel guilt or shame about. This is something we should connect with and look at in a positive way and understand where that energy has come from and how we might use it. Now, how we might use it, we could come back to Brahmacharya in the sense that, right conduct. How are we using that energy? How are we sharing that energy with other people? And how does it feel? Most things in life will feel good before, during, and after. It's normally a good sign of whether you're expressing yourself in a good way. Yeah? If it feels good before, if it feels good during, and it feels good after, usually we're in line with ourselves at some level. From a physical level, there is the physical need, and I would say that this is a very, simplistic way of looking at this, but also potentially a very superficial way. There is a bodily need to express ourselves sexually, and that desire builds, but at some level, I would describe that as quite superficial. And the reason I say that is because over the years, through different meditations and different practices with myself and obviously with partners, there is a much deeper way of connecting with that energy. My experiences of practicing yoga for many years, especially I'm going to relate this to Ashtanga yoga and the different meditation practices I've had, is visualizing that energy and connecting with that energy in a much deeper way that is not physical. Yeah, so not the physical form of sexual energy, but much more of the subtle form and how we might feel that in the body. This is why I continue practicing Ashtanga yoga, for example, because there's this deep concentration on the central axis of the body. Yeah, Bandha, these deep points within our system, You could call these points, these chakra points, these different energy points within the body that run up and down the spinal column. Ashtanga yoga, in my experience, enables you to connect with that on a very physical level. So your mind builds a connection to these different points within the central channel of your body. And for most practitioners I've met that go into Ashtanga yoga at this level will understand what I'm talking about, in the sense of building this connection from the central part of your body, where all of your movement comes from the inside out. It becomes much less about the extremities, the arms and the legs, much more about how you use your diaphragm and how you connect with this sense of bandha. The deep strength work that we do in Ashtanga yoga, the lifting, the jumping, the pressing, the squeezing, the twisting, and specifically back bending, will give you a very strong and deep connection to the central axis of your body. To me, this is like phase one. Yeah, in terms of how you might approach this and how you might go about it, it's very difficult to connect with these deeper energy channels in the body if you don't have a map or a reference point of what that feels like. For example, if I'm doing some deeper back bends, my focus around the central axis of my body is laser focused. I often talk about this to other students. Your concentration is nowhere else. It's completely around the central axis of your body. You're dialed in, you're focused, and you're building up this map and this reference of what that feels like. Your brain, you're embodied. You're connecting the dots around these different axis points in your body. And my experience of going into this deeper level, on a physical level, with this intention to explore this, not necessarily to perform an asana, but to explore the energetic feeling of the central axis of the nervous system and the body, is where you build up this reference. You start connecting things that you haven't felt before. You visualize things changing and moving, and things start to shift. This can take some time to explore. It can take some time to connect with this. So if you're listening to this podcast and this doesn't really make much sense to you, or unsure, I would say that you have to find the right teacher and the right practices that help connect with that feeling in the body, because it's not necessarily such a physical one. It's something that you feel more on an energetic level, and over time that starts to become more normalized. Moving forward from that into your meditation practices, this is where you really start to cultivate this in an imaginary level. You start to visualize what this feels like, this up and down motion of your breath, and how that connects to your lower bandhas around Mula Bandha, and this moving and pulsing of this energy up and down the central axis of your body. And you use your imagination, and you use specific focuses on specific things like deities, specific mantras, or just mostly around your breath and visualizing your breath moving up and down your body. You start to build up a connection of what this feels like. Again, this can take some time to cultivate that, to sense what that feels like. Now, why is this important, and why is this related to sexual energy? In my opinion, from practicing this, sexual energy, the drive that comes from that need, that want, that desire to embrace someone else, to be close to someone else, to feel love, to connect with another human being. Union is definitely the right word. To unite, to bring two forces together. As if listeners who've listened to my previous episodes, I'm fascinated with this from yoga, this opposing energies, bandha. Sexual energy to me is the same. It's two opposing forces. It's two opposite energies. I'm going to say masculine and feminine for the point of this podcast, but if that doesn't resonate with you for whatever reason, the opposites, just think about it as opposite energies. One type of energy has a certain drive and a certain force to it, and an opposing energy has the opposite. You could think about this in different ways, but in Buddhism, masculine energy can symbolize different things, and the deities within Buddhism, from a masculine perspective, can symbolize something like compassion or action. When I think about that from a masculine energy, I definitely think about it in terms of action and moving forward. When we think about the feminine, we could say that from a Buddhist perspective, this could symbolize wisdom and emptiness, or being receptive. Yeah? And I'm just using this as a way to explain how I visualize this from a perspective of opposing energies. And when those energies come together, something happens. Yeah, the balancing of those two energies, something comes from that. Yeah, the union of those two energies together is something else is created, and I think that we all feel that and we see that when we connect with sexual partners, or we have an energetic connection to someone else. There's a magnetism there. Yeah, it's beyond physical. Yeah. We've all felt this. Yeah, we're drawn to some people. There's a magnetism to some people sexually. Yeah. And we should play with that. This is what it is to be a human. To me, this is super fun and interesting to play with, yeah, on an energetic level. Not necessarily on a physical level. On an energetic level, we're drawn to people. There's a magnetism between two people. And from my perspective, when that masculine and feminine energy connects, there is a feeling associated to that. There is a sensation that is associated to those two energies coming together that feels really good. Yeah, you could call that love. We could call that compassion. There's a light energy that's associated to that. There's a blissful energy that's associated to coming together of those two energies. You might say you felt that when you fell in love with someone. Yeah, we've all felt that feeling. It's the best feeling in the world. You fall in love with someone. There's a reason it's called falling in love, because you let go. Yeah, to be vulnerable with another human being and allow those energies to unite is probably, I would say, the best feeling on earth. Yeah, it's totally blissful. You're in a bubble. You're in a love state. You're in this bubble love state. That's you allowing those energies to meet. Yeah, they're not being blocked. They're not being restricted or controlled. You're allowing those energies to flow and combine to make something else. This blissful state. My theory is that advanced meditative practitioners in, say, Buddhism or yoga, for example, you can cultivate that internally. Yeah, on an energetic level, with specific meditations or practices where you focus on those energies uniting, the union of those two energies creates this blissful state. And what I've always found fascinating within tantric practices is the allowance of that, yeah, and with the right intention, yeah, not from a sexual pleasure perspective, but the state that is found from allowing those two energetic qualities to unite, yeah? And there's a blissful state that happens from those energies combining. And if you can stay in that state, then I would say you've found the key. And, in most Buddhist and monastic Buddhist practices, the key to liberation is finding a blissful state which leads you into the deeper aspects of spiritual practices where potentially you might find some enlightenment. I'm not there yet. I don't think most of us aren't, but I don't necessarily think it's even a goal to say, but I think that cultivating that energy within you, cultivating that sense of these, I'm calling it masculine and feminine energy, combining to create this blissful state, so you feel more love, you feel more compassion, yeah? And you're not blocking anything, yeah? We don't want to block things in life, yeah? Lots of us block things. We restrict things. We stop things from happening. we're missing out. Yeah, there's energetic qualities that happen from allowing things to flow and connect. Yeah, that's what we all want. Yeah, connection, union, closeness, love. Yeah, we don't want to restrict and block things, but it has to come from the right place with the right intention. Yeah, the intention behind these practices is to feel more love and compassion. Now, this is the best way to word this. If you're doing these practices on your own, you can be vulnerable, yeah? You can be vulnerable with yourself. You have to be vulnerable with yourself to allow these energy channels to connect and to meet, yeah? It's harder to do that with another person if you're not being vulnerable. And the key to love, in my opinion, you have to be totally vulnerable. You know, you have to allow someone in. We've all felt that from another human being. When you both allow each other in, it's magical, yeah? I mean, it really is a magical feeling, yeah? This is why I think we're all drawn to this. Because aside from the physical sensation of an orgasm, or that blissful state of an orgasm, we all know what that feeling is like, to be really vulnerable with someone and allow those two energies to combine. It's magical, yeah? It's beyond physical. You can feel it, yeah? It's like in your gut. It's in the root of your core. Butterflies, these kinds of things we experience, you know, the different chakra points in the body. We've all felt that. Unfortunately, maybe some of us haven't. And we restrict these things. We don't allow people in because we're afraid of being hurt, or, you know, for whatever reason. Lots of us block that type of energy. And I think we meet people with that same blockages, and we don't really explore anything more than that. And I think that's sad, because it's really one of the most beautiful, playful things you can do in life, is connecting with that love, sexual energy, yeah, that masculine, feminine energy, that combination of those energies where you allow that to bloom. Yeah, it's like a flower just, open. Yeah. But I think that a way of looking at this is what happens when you cultivate that energy internally. When you can cultivate that energy internally and you feel that love energy, you feel that compassion, and you feel it not just for yourself or for a specific person or a specific thing you're meditating on, but you start to feel that generally. You start to feel that towards other people, towards strangers, yeah? You start to see people in a more loving and compassionate way, yeah? When you do that, you attract that in your life. Yeah, if you're full of hate and bitterness and jealousy and, negative emotions, I'm not necessarily saying you're gonna attract that in your life, but you're gonna see that, yeah? A lot around what we experience in life is the way we attend to it, yeah? So the way we see things. If we see things in a fearful, jealous, angry way, that's the experience we're gonna have. When you cultivate that loving, compassionate energy within you, you see that, yeah? You're practicing that, yeah? I've said this many times on this podcast. You are what you practice. If you're practicing balance, if you're practicing bandha, if you're practicing cultivating loving, connective, creative, sexual energy within you with the intention of expressing that in a compassionate, loving way, you're going to meet that more in your life. You're going to see more of that in your world. You're going to attract people that also see that, because they see that in you. And it's like a magnet. To me, this is like a superpower. Yeah, this is beyond the physical world of what we see day to day. It's something you feel, which is why yogic practices are so important, because you become embodied. You become more in tune with your intuition. You become more in tune with your sensory feedback of what feels right and wrong. And you get very good with boundaries. Yeah, I said this many times in this podcast before. Your sexual energy is valuable. Your sexual creative energy is important, and it's important to maintain it. Yeah, lots of things in your life will try to take that away. Yeah, not in a negative way, but modern life is very demanding. and our energies can be all over the place. I try to, my most is to maintain my energy as much as I can and give it out sparingly with the right intention. You could say that this is Brahmacharya, yeah? Not controlling or restricting it, but being mindful with how you use it, yeah? Because it's valuable, yeah? You only have so much. We only have so much energy to give. And when you're mindful around that energy, when you can cultivate that energy and channel that energy within you, then it's important how you share it, yeah? Because we don't want to just give that willy-nilly out to everyone all the time. You know, you could say that would be a waste. Again, this could be Brahmacharya, where you're potentially wasting energy, where you're not using it in the most loving, kind, and compassionate way. This, to me, is where this gets a little bit misguided in terms of the way it's expressed. Yeah, when you think about sexual energy, creative energy, and how you can cultivate that energy, you become more mindful of how you use it, because you don't want to lose it. Yeah, it feels so good to have it inside you. It feels so good to cultivate that energy internally. We don't want to just go throwing that around willy-nilly everywhere, because it's important to us how we use it. And we've done all that work to cultivate that energy, and we're very mindful about how it gets expressed. And this could be, I would say, a better, for want of a better word, way of viewing Brahmacharya in terms of how we use our sexual creative energy. Because that sexual creative energy can be used in many ways, yeah? When you build that love energy up inside you and that masculine and feminine energy combined, you become more creative, yeah? You have more ideas. Intuitively, things will come to you. You will think clearer. You will trust where that magnetic energy is guiding you, and you want to build that energy up to see where it can take you in life, yeah? It has a very light, creative flow feeling to it, yeah? Which is why potentially abstaining from sex for periods or being mindful of how you use that energy has a large benefit, yeah? I'm not saying sex is wrong and bad. I'm not saying you need to control your sexual physical activities, but I'm saying that from a spiritual perspective, how you can cultivate that energy internally has a big effect on your life. It has a powerful effect of how you connect with people, and it can also affect how you direct your energy and where it takes you, because you've got all this love energy, compassion, it feels fun, creative, and you're going to let that guide you, yeah? It's also like a compass, you could say, yeah? And how intuitively you might connect with that energy. We could say, you know, let's just touch on that just briefly. We could say that, I would say potentially a wasteful way of using that energy would be something like pornography, yeah? Because this is not to be shameful or to say that, you know, you shouldn't do that. I don't mean this in a controlling way, but it's a very superficial way to use that energy, yeah? It's a very simple and simplistic way to use that in a physical way that I would say might not necessarily feel good before, during, and after. Maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. But my opinion on this personally is that there's a deeper, more explorative way we can use that energy, where we can create union with another person or union within yourself, yeah? Where you cultivate that energy on a non-superficial level that goes much deeper. It's much more on a love energy. It's much more about connecting with someone else in the real world, yeah? Connecting with someone in a real loving way with vulnerability. That, to me, has brought more love, better things, better relationships, and a more fun and energetic feeling in my life than, say, in a superficial way. And I think this can also go back to Brahmacharya in the sense of how we use that energy. And it's just being about mindful. I don't believe it's in a controlling or a restrictive way. I don't think, again, going back to the animalistic side of what it is to be a human being, I don't believe in suppressing that. I believe in cultivating it and using it in a mindful way, using it in an exploratory way, where I think we all want this. We have more energy. We have more creative energy. We have the sense and the feeling of love. Yeah, you feel more compassion and love. That's when you feel like that in your life more often, you are generally happier. You're more content, and you have better connections with people. You see the positive in life more often, and you see the positive in other people more often. And again, it's like a magnet. Yeah, I can't emphasize that enough. When you can cultivate that energy internally, it's a magnet for more positive things. It has a profound effect in the physical world. You know, at a deeper level, you could say, in Buddhism, is the empty space behind this. And again, depending on how deep you want to go into this, there's ways to explore this in a meditative way. You know, where these thoughts come from, where the feelings come from, this empty space, this potentially light energy, this bright energy field, you might call it, where these thoughts come from, where these feelings come from, how they appear from nowhere, and how that manifests in a physical way in reality. This is too deep to go into on this podcast around the illusionary body and different specific meditations on different deities or different meditative practices. This is really a talk or a discussion that would probably be better with an advanced Buddhist teacher or someone specifically who's gone into that on a specific level. But maybe that will be one for a podcast in the future, just specifically on these types of meditations. But they have a profound effect on your physical body, the way you view life, and how you generally feel in yourself. And I believe this comes from, I'm going to call it sexual energy, creative energy. Yeah? In my view, it's all from the same kind of source. Yeah, everything that comes into this world, everything that is created, expands, comes from the same energy. You know, modern day physics, quantum entanglement, different things like this that we're proving and all the time goes into this more on a material level and trying to explain really what yogis and lamas and Buddhists have been talking about for thousands of years, really. But it's helping us understand how this works when we interact with different things and how we feel that within our body. Yeah? Especially quantum entanglement, when we think about sexual relationships or how we're drawn to different people, there's an exchange that goes on beyond what you can see physically. Yeah? You all feel this. I think we all feel this. I think people who are more embodied feel this. I can give an example of this. People that you've spent a lot of time with and people that you've engaged with physically and especially sexually, there's an exchange that goes on there beyond physical. I can think about an ex-partner of mine. We were together for many years. And in a way, I can still feel her within me in some way sometimes, yeah, on a non-physical level. Yeah, this could also go back to Brahmacharya in terms of being mindful how we share energy, especially sexually. Is whenever I feel that in my body, when I feel my partner's not with us anymore, unfortunately, it's a good feeling, you know, because that was a good exchange mostly, you know, it was a good energetic exchange with someone. There's a love energy there, yeah? A love energy that's beyond the physical. There's a connection there that is very deep that you share with someone that you've spent time with. And I believe that you leave a mark on each other. I can't explain it in a physical way, but I believe that energetically you leave a mark on each other. And it's much better to live through life feeling that you've had a positive exchange with someone sexually and energetically, yeah? So we could think about Brahmacharya in that way. Like, it's important how we express ourselves with someone else. It's important that energy we share and how that exchange happens. And I think being mindful about how we do that and what we want from those unions, you know, those opposing energies, how that can come together, can be a beautiful thing. And generally the best relationships I've had on a sexual level have also been the most creative, the most fun, and lots of really positive things happened in those relationships because it was right energetically. It was a good exchange between you and that person. It wasn't just physical. We're all drawn to people on a physical level. Sex sells. We can't, we see that in our life everywhere in terms of advertising and social media. We're drawn to beautiful things, beautiful women, beautiful men. We're drawn to how things look on a purely physical, beautiful level, which I actually really like. But in terms of the exchange, the union of those energies, I think I've had more benefit from being mindful of that and how we exchange those energies and how those energies can combine. And just going back to where it comes from, there's lots of different theories on this, but in, how Buddhism potentially sees this is this creative light energy, that when we think about everything that comes into fruition in this world, I think about it in the same way. It has the same energetic quality of creation. I would say the ultimate expression of the masculine and feminine energy is the creation of life. It's a miracle. I know we've broken this down, not I, but science has broken this down on a biological level, but there is an unknown that happens where consciousness comes into being, and the culmination of two people's energies coming together to create life is a beautiful thing. And you could say that this is the peak expression of sexual energy from a physical level between two people, where life is born, life comes into fruition. And in a way, this happens all around us. We just don't pay attention to it on a material level, where things are being expressed and expanded and come into light all of the time. And I think that we all have that within us. We all have that creative energy to express things and expand in a positive way. Love energy, sexual energy, to me is a positive energy. It when you focus on it and you cultivate it, you can't help but feel good, blissful, happy, compassionate. This is what comes from focusing on that energy. It's not a negative energy. It's not destructive. It's not chaotic. This is a positive energy. And like I said on the Subtle Energy podcast, it's very difficult to focus on that if you're consumed with negativity, if you're consumed with hate, anxiety, fear. You won't really feel that, which is why some practitioners can meet on different levels. And I've experienced this and I've witnessed this, and I've met this with different men and women, where you can meet someone vibrationally on a certain level, and you can connect with someone vibration on a certain level that's not physical. It's not a physical attraction, but there's a sexual energy, there's a creative energy, there's a love energy you experience with another person that just feels great, And vibrationally, I think different practitioners meet each other along that, I don't want to say ladder as if it's hierarchical. I just think that some people have the awareness to explore that in different ways. We could say the most simplistic way would be a physical exchange, a sexual exchange. Another level could be vibrationally, where there isn't a physical exchange, but there's a love energy that happens between two people or a group of people that creates positive energy. And I think that this gets confused sometimes between people and practitioners, and it's seen as, a physical sexual attraction, but actually it's something much else. And I think that practitioners who've gone into this at a deeper level understand the difference, and they can connect with another person purely on an energetic level, purely on a love channel, purely on a kind of creative energy that creates a lot of really good positive energy that isn't physical. And I think that takes a lot of, we could say, control or mindfulness around that. Again, this could be Brahmacharya, but I think this is more of an advanced practice, you could say, in some ways, around how you share energy with people and how you can use that energy in a creative way to create a positive energy that doesn't just help you, or it doesn't just help that other person, but it actually helps the people around you. And again, this goes back to intention. Yeah, with the right intention and the right mindfulness, sexual energy, that creative love energy, that masculine and feminine energy coming together can really create such a positive field that it affects everyone around you. It affects other people in your life, and they also feel it. It's like a magnetism. They feel that positive energy, yeah? We've all felt that around some people. You could say some people are magnetic, yeah? They have a vibe, and they're putting that out. And I think we go through different phases in our life where we feel that more often than not. You know, in my own experience, I've gone through phases of feeling that very strongly, you know, in a very strong, positive way. And at other times not. And maybe, you know, that's even been felt on this podcast. You know, there's periods in the last 5 years that have been quite stressful, you know, family members dying or other difficult things come up that takes us out of that, and we get, you know, more focused on, we could say, some other difficult aspects of what it is to be alive. But really, what I've found the most benefit and the most light in my life is focusing on that energy. It's when you feel it and you know what it feels like, you just want to create more of it. You want to kind of, you know, encourage more of that in your life. And I think that it has a really positive, energetic feeling within you that affects everyone else. And, you know, going back to that, that's what we talk about a lot in yogic practices, yeah? It doesn't matter how many nice, happy things you're doing externally, but if internally you're full of hate, bitterness, jealousy, you know, it has to come from the inside out, yeah? You can't expect the world to change for you. And maybe a lot of us is just we're seeing that the world in that negative way. We have to create that change internally so that that expresses externally from us, and then we invite that in. Yeah, we're open. Yeah, this receptive, again, I think of the feminine energy in that way, this receptive energy. We're open to something. Yeah, we're open to someone else. We're open to things happening, and we're open to positive exchanges with people rather than pushing people away and shutting things down because of some potentially negative previous experience, which gets cleared in yoga. I've said this before, you know, with the right intentional practices, we clear those blockages on a physical and an energetic level, so we become more receptive to love, compassion, and I would say cultivating that sexual energy. But maybe I've said enough on this today. I mean, just to touch on the celibacy thing, you know, again, I wasn't drawn to that, but, you know, practitioners who go into that on a different level, you know, that is a very, you know, you take a vow, you know, to be celibate and to go into spiritual practices on that level, really where potentially you're trying to, you know, escape samsara, you know, the cycle of rebirth, and, you know, trying to shut down unnecessary attachments and desires. And I think for most of us that might be beyond our experience in this life of where we want to go with this. But I think mostly on this podcast I wanted to just talk about, I guess, Brahmacharya, but really how we use our energy and being mindful of it and not thinking about it in a controlled or restricted way where we think we're blocking something or shutting something. Again, this is why I was always drawn to Tantra, in a way that we get to express this, but we can change the way we view it. Yeah, we're not restricting something, we're just being mindful of how we express ourselves in a sexual way, in a creative way that benefits the people around us and isn't in some way narcissistic or selfish. Yeah, love is something that's shared. Yeah, love isn't control. You know, when you really love someone, on, you know, a deep level, you really love someone, you know, you should be willing to let them go. To really love someone means that you can let them go. Sometimes relationships run their course, connections run their course, and it's time to move on. Loving someone is allowing them to go. You don't own anyone. We don't have that control over someone. Any partner in my life, I've ever had, potentially letting them go is the right thing, because that's the loving thing to do. That means you really love someone and you care about them, you care about their well-being going forward. Again, it feels good before, during and after, and I think the best relationships are like that. So to really love someone means that you might have to let them go, and that goes from anything in your life, really. We could say that's non-attachment. We could say that's a positive practice of non-attachment, is love. Loving something or someone is allowing it to move forward, to flow, because you know that that's going to benefit them, and if that benefits them, then it's going to benefit you, because you're going to have that good exchange. And again, going back to this quantum entanglement, what we exchange between each other, and when that exchange runs its course, as I say, I don't believe that fully ends. There's people in my life that I still feel, there's people in my life that aren't around anymore, they're not alive on a physical level, but from time to time I still feel them. Love breaks boundaries. That connection that you have with people is beyond physical. I truly believe that. I've got into this in different forms, in different practices I find this very fascinating, but the connections we make are not just now. Again, we could be Brahmacharya, where we think about how the mindfulness we have around who and how we connect with people, and how that affects us in terms of our boundaries. Like I say, your energy, your sexual energy, your sushumna, your chakras, this energy channel you have in your body is sacred. It's important, and you should be very mindful of how you use that energy and how you share it. And again, I don't mean this in a controlling, restrictive way, but in terms of how it feels before, during and after. Like I say, it takes a lot to cultivate this energy, this positive energy, and sometimes life is trying to take that away from us a lot. And I think the more we go into yoga, the better we get at having good boundaries with other people, so that we're able to maintain our energy and our sexual energy, so that we can have a bigger effect and a more positive effect on more people. The more positive effect we have, the more love we express, the more compassion we express, that is magnetic, and it has an effect on everyone around you, in a positive way. So I think the more we can cultivate that internally, the bigger effect we'll have through all of our life, not just on your yoga mat, where it's no good if you're this super kind, compassionate person on your yoga mat, and as soon as you leave, that all goes out the window, which is why I've been a little bit outspokenly on previous episodes about, bad teachers out there, There, unfortunately, some people don't practice this in their life as a whole, it's just a momentary thing. I think that a good sign of your yoga practice is when it affects your whole life, not just when you're in the studio and you're practicing, but actually when you're out and around, and how you're interacting with Joe Public. I think I will leave it there. Ciao.